Hello, this is From Caracas and I am Rey Gómez. On the Colonial Thoughts, I will be talking with Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni. He's visiting us these days. Hello, Professor. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. What is an African professor doing in Venezuela these days?
In fact, let me begin by saying Venezuela and the Latin American region, the Caribbean region, Africa, Asia, they are part of the global south. And the job which we are doing, the job of decolonization, addresses the core issues of marginalization, peripherization of the global south, and the domination and exploitation of the global south by the global north.
So I think that's a very important concept for you to define to our audience. What does global south mean?
Global south is a term which is actually a successor to another term which was third world. And today they are moving ahead and they are using global south, meaning those areas which were actually victims of global imperialism and colonialism.
But the global south doesn't necessarily has to be in the southern hemisphere of the world, because I think there are people in the northern hemisphere that are also colonized.
In fact, the concept is not a geographical concept. It's actually a concept about power and the positionality within a asymmetrical global power dynamics. So you can really, you are correct, you can actually belong to the global south even if you stay in the United States, even if you stay in Europe, as long as the hierarchical racial divisions of the human species defines you as a subhuman, then you belong to the global south. So the global north is also not a geography, but is actually a position of power which was created by in the last 500 years.
Okay, so you were saying you are in Venezuela as part of a global south.
Yeah.
And how do you see Venezuela?
I came into Venezuela on Sunday evening. You know, when you are outside from Africa, we rely mostly from CNN, which tells us that
that's why I was asking you my question, because the headlines of Venezuela, when people come here, they say, no, but that's not what I saw on TV.
Yeah, because on TV, the image which is given is a country which is in a very deep crisis, particularly a deep humanitarian crisis. It's a country which is led by a very dictatorial regime. That's what you get from the CNN. But when I came here, I've been talking to academics. I've met the Vice Minister of Africa in the Foreign Affairs. I went to the palace of the president yesterday, and I got a different view altogether. And I've been talking also to the intellectuals from the global south, people like Professor Enrique Dussel, people like Professor Ramon Grossvogel, who have been giving me a different picture altogether of what is happening here, which then gives me an impression of a country which is under embargo from the Western imperial powers.
So, as part of all that information I have been receiving these days here in Venezuela, if you have to define what is happening in this country, what would you say?
In fact, what is distinctive about this country is that it is in the vanguard of a revolution. The attempt to reconstitute the society along socialist lines, attempt to actually empower the people of Venezuela economically. It doesn't sit very well within the global imperialist system, which wants these countries to be actually hunting grounds for cheap oil, for cheap minerals. And if you then articulate and project your sovereignty and you try to claim it, then they actually discipline you and punish you, and the means through which they do it is what we call colonial matrices of power, whereby they then make sure they create artificial shortages, create a bad image of you through media and all that, so that the people rise against you and then you appear like you were actually a failing leader and a failing state.
Are there any common points common linking points between Venezuela and African people?
Indeed, there are. The first one is the historical connections, of course, which dates back to the foundations of Eurocentric modernity, which was founded on the enslavement and the shipping of people from the African continent into the Americas. And then secondly, the whole of Venezuela is part and parcel of Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa, and all of them, they then experienced Western colonialism, and that's a common factor which actually makes all of us then exist in the periphery of a global order which privileges Europe and North America.
Okay, so is there a necessity of putting into practice decolonial thought also in Venezuela, also in Latin America, and even the African territory?
In fact, I will say that the decolonial thought is actually a planetary thought.
Okay.
It's a planetary thought in the sense that we cannot continue to live in a world where we live like in a jungle, where the powerful determine the fate of everyone. Where if you then question the powerful, if you challenge the powerful, then you suffer victimhood. And I think that fundamentally then means that the global South needs to deepen and revive the South-South collaborations and the solidarities.
And how to do that?
Yeah, the issue is we need to first of all find the commonalities, as we have put the question. The commonalities that are already there, and the leaders actually know the commonalities, that we've been pushed into the periphery of the capitalist system. We have been dragged into it unwillingly, and the issue is how capitalism operates in the periphery is not the same way it operates in the metropole. In the periphery is actually racial capitalism, which actually reduces all the people of the global South into providers of cheap labor. And the resources of the global South, they become actually the cheapest raw materials for the benefit of the global North. And I think it is important that at a political level, we need to actually take that seriously and then come together, because when we stand together, only that way can we actually resist successfully the imperialist onslaught on the global South.
Does that political level need to break any rule belonging to the old political system in order to revive, in order to fight against the colonization and neo-colonization?
In fact, the message from the global South is a very clear one, and the message is the question of Europe and the question of North America. The question of Europe and question of North America is the question of a particular province of the world, which then pushes itself and makes it the center of the world. And then it pushes all other parts of the world into periphery, into marginality, and almost into non-existence. And the message from the global South is that we have nothing wrong with Europe, we have nothing wrong with North America, but what we won't accept is the idea that it is the center of the world and we don't exist. So the message we are giving to Europe is that it is a province of the world. It is not the center of the world. There are other provinces of the world. And how we can then move forward into a better world is then we accept that there are many provinces of the world. And if there are many provinces of the world, then the issue is that we need to establish good neighborliness. And the good neighborliness is not something which is hierarchical, whereby you have those who have lighter skins, they have the higher ontological density. Those who have darker skins, they have the lower ontological densities, and they must actually work for other people. And that is what we are trying to fight, because the decolonization struggles, which started earlier on in the 20th century, they did not actually succeed in changing the hierarchization of human species in accordance with race. Up to today, you can tell that at the top echelons of the pyramidal structure of power which exists today, you will find that those who are lighter skins, they're actually on the top. And politically, the Pentagon, NATO, they are actually controlling the world. And how they control the world is by accumulation of weapons of mass destruction, which then makes it very hard to actually challenge them. But the decoloniality project then is part and parcel of mobilization of the people of the global south. So
but
that
do they mobilize by themselves, or is it an organized mobilization?
It needs to be organized, of course. It needs to be organized because the major problem with the colonialism and the coloniality is that it is seductive. It has actually misled some of our people. It has created pitfalls of consciousness. People who speak, who are located physically on the weaker side of the power structure, but they speak as though they are on the powerful side of the world power spectrum. And once you do that, we have given coloniality. That's the success of coloniality. But what we are trying to do through the decolonial thinking schools is actually to then make people understand clearly the issue of how modern power works. We want people to understand the politics of knowledge, that which knowledge actually governs the world and which knowledge privileges Europe and underdevelops us. And we need that to be put clearly into the public domain.
Why took us so long to be aware of the necessity of apply a decolonization theory?
In fact, I can't say it took us long. I think we have, since the time of colonial encounters, if you think about this region, you go back as far as 1492 with the arrival of Christopher Columbus, this part of the world. People have been resisting. They might not have been using the word decoloniality.
And did they know how to resist?
Yeah, they knew how to resist. There were various ways of, we can name a Haitian revolution, we can name the liberation struggles, armed liberation struggles, people resisting.
Why weren't all those revolution processes successful?
Partially successful. We can't say if they were completely successful, we won't be talking about what we're talking now. If you look at this region, you can go back to the Haitian Revolution, you can go back to the Cuban Revolution, you can go back to the Chilean Revolution, right up to the Bolivarian Revolution. And all those are attempts to actually question the modus operandi of the current world order. And the victories cannot be total. We make victories. The colonialists also, they increase their offensive against us. And as you can tell, for now, they are actually on the offensive, particularly against Venezuela.
That's right. And what's happening now in Venezuela, do you think that we are living an offensive phase of colonialism?
Imperialism is on the offensive. It's really, it sees Venezuela as the leader of the revolutionary thought.
Right.
And as such, they are putting every means, some of which are very hard to see, particularly the ones which work in terms of making sure that financial transactions don't go through properly. They make sure that they create scarcity in the shops in terms of food. And all those are strategies of colonialism which are well known. They are strategies of imperialism which are well known because that's how they then remove revolutionary leaders, isolate them from the people, then destroy them.
Do you think the social media are also playing the role?
A big one. That's why I started by saying my understanding of Venezuelan situation was from CNN. And the CNN, as you know, it has its own discourse about how it presents the global south and how it presents the global north. So it will be important really to, the media is at the center of what we call colonial matrices of power, because it is the media which mediates the ideas, the knowledges, the conceptions of being of the north, and then it generalizes them as the conceptions of the world, and it then marginalizes the conceptions of being, the conceptions of power, the way we try to organize, reconstitute the state. All that, as long as it is not in line with the capitalist world system, it then condemns as something which you are actually repeating a failed ideology.
How are the African peoples being represented on the social media today?
African people, I think they've been the worst victims of the social media in the sense that they've always been presented as savages. And as I was speaking at the beginning, the way coloniality works is, first of all, to colonize being itself. And what it does is that it socially classifies the human species in accordance with race. And it then creates a hierarchical order of racial ontological densities. And the Africans, the black people, they've been put at the lowest echelons of that power structure. And that is then reproduced by media today. In the 19th century, it was done by anthropologists. Today, it is done by the media.
So you think the African people don't really know, I mean, as we would like to know, their origins in order to fight against that philosophy, the globalizing philosophy?
In fact, Africa has got rich traditions of resistance. Rich traditions of resistance which goes back by various names: Ethiopianism, Caveism, African nationalism, Pan-Africanism. All those are attempts, including the African Renaissance, all those are attempts by African people to redefine themselves, reposition themselves, and fundamentally free themselves from the way they are defined from outside. So you have the idea of Africa, which actually cascades from European portrayal of African people. And we've reached a stage now that we want the African idea of Africa. That is an idea of Africa constructed by Africans themselves as agents of history, not as passive actors in global history. They've never been passive actors in global history. I've actually given the first lecture here in Venezuela a day before yesterday, entitled The Entrapment of Africa in Global Coloniality, whereby I started with the articulation of the way Africans were underdeveloped through enslavement, the way Africans were peripherized through being excluded from the Westphalian sovereignty system, the way Africans were put in the lowest echelons of the modern power structure in the 20th century when they were given so-called political independence. They were then invited into the United Nations to occupy the lowest echelons of the existing system. So what we need to understand is how the world system works. If you project, like Venezuela is projecting, an anti-systemic philosophy of liberation, what does the system do? The system either accommodates you or it disciplines you. And the disciplining involves even assassination attempts and the destruction of the economic structures so that you appear like you were wrong in the first place. You can check the media. A lot of people have a wrong conception of what is happening in Venezuela. They think actually Venezuela is going where others are coming from, is pursuing an old ideology which won't succeed. But that is not true. The truth of the matter is that anything which is not in tandem and conterminous with capitalism, they will always make it appear to be unreasonable, to be craziness.
Speaking of existence, do Zimbabweans exist?
Yeah, they see, like all the people of the global south, there was a time when colonialism reduced us to subjects of the colonial states. And as subjects of the colonial states, we were defined by colonialists themselves as natives, as people who exist outside modernity, people who exist outside history, people who are fundamentally prehistoric. And then they put themselves into modernity, and then they become agents of history. So the whole decolonization project in the global south, in Africa included, the issue was that we want to write ourselves back into history, which was denied. And we were talking here about the theft of history. In order to colonize people, you must first of all steal their history.
Do you think people from the global south have been, for years, self-denied
Yeah, in fact, the knowledge domain, that's why this school is important. The knowledge domain has been a center of denial of history, denial of being, denial of agency. And the issue is that through the knowledge system, what we talk about in the decolonial thought is the issue of how the cognitive empire, the empire which invades the mental universe of a people in such a way that it imposes its own thinking and it destroys everything, and it tells you that you had no knowledge before its arrival. That's what we are trying to rectify. Because if you use, say, the metaphor of a computer, you will find that they remove the existing hard disk of knowledge and memory, and then they impose the European memory, as Nguku wa Thiong'o will put it. And once they do that, the consequences are alienation. You are alienated from yourself, you are alienated from your language, you are alienated from your culture. And the whole decolonial project, the whole liberation struggles which are taking place now, is a restorative project. How to restore that which has been taken. How to remember, because once they then alienate you, they make you not see each other as one people. They make you see each other as individuals. And because of that, then you can't organize. So we want to remember, tell people that you are one people, so that they are able to fight in a concerted, unified purpose. Colonialists, however powerful they are, imperialists, the US is a powerful country. Europe as a collective is a powerful collectivity. But when they evade, even a country like Venezuela, they don't evade as one. They actually use NATO. They come as a group. But when we resist as one weak countries. And then it's easier to be decimated by imperial powers.
As a professor, I ask you, how should education play its role in this struggle, about this struggle?
In fact, we can't start by its role. We start by saying which education. Because there is education for colonization, which makes you see everything Venezuelan as nonsense, and everything coming from the US and from Europe as the valuable form of education. And the whole of Global South has been subjected to that we then reproduced. That's where the question of subjectivity becomes very important, because the colonial education had a purpose, and the purpose was actually to then destroy the knowledges which were pre-existing, then impose European knowledge as the knowledge. But at the end of the day, it then becomes seductive. Tells you, if you go to school, if you acquire degrees, perhaps we will recognize you as a human being. But the racial scale, the racial ceiling is very low. Even if you go through the school system, you hit it. And once you hit the racial ceiling, that's when you remember that, but this thing is not true. That they can change you. They are inviting you in, but at the same time they are closing you out.
So do you think is there a necessity of a new concept of school?
Of course. That's
and
why
education.
That's why we are having a decolonial school here when we have the universities. The decolonial school teaches in a different way.
Okay.
And it teaches history in a different way. It teaches politics in a different way. It teaches the economy in a different way. So that people then begin to understand that perhaps there is miseducation, and then there is need for re-education. And the decolonial project is a form of re-education after centuries of miseducation.
Okay. Professor, thank you very much
Sure.
for all these explanations to our audience.
Thank you.
With Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni, I have been talking on the colonial theories and the colonial thought. Thank you very much. This is From Caracas. I am Rey Gómez.